welcome everyone to today's webinar on lunar communications. We have here Eric Luther from Cesium Astro, who is also the company which is the sponsor of this webinar. So we'd like to thank them for making this possible today. And Takeshi Hakamada from ispace may or may not be joining a little bit later on today because of a last-minute scheduling issue. So we'll dive into the content we had planned anyway. And yeah, so communication between spacecraft and Earth is one of the most vital elements allowing humans to reach the moon. But what happens once we get there? Over the summer, NASA awarded the $73 million Commercial Lunar Payload Services CLPS CP-12 contract to Draper, which is an aerospace company with a history in space exploration from the earliest stages of Apollo. Draper, along with partners including ispace and Cesium, are working on this next phase of lunar comms technology. So with that, Eric, you can take it away from the Cesium side.
Thank you very much. It's really an incredible time right now in the industry, and it's a pleasure to be a part of it. I'm going to share real quick and just share a few slides and talk through those. Give me just a moment. Excellent. So thanks again for hosting the webinar with Payload. It's an absolute pleasure to work with you and your team. It's really, the time has come around again for us to take those next steps and visit the moon. We're excited to be a part of this, as we look back at what our parents and their parents were able to do back in the late 50s and early 60s. It's really incredible. The first person in space, the first objects in space was the end of the 50s. And the first men on the moon were the end of the 60s. And so just in a 10-year time period, we went from starting to be able to access space to taking those initial steps on the moon. And communications has been a critical piece of that from the very beginning. When we look at Apollo, the unified S-band was really a key innovation that in the early days of Mercury and Gemini, they were using UHF and VHF type signals in order to communicate. And the unified S-band allowed them to not only work with voice and telemetry and tracking signals, but also add television, biometric data, and other signals within the same waveform. And what's fascinating about this is we still use S-band and these same frequencies today for these types of missions. The other thing is you read through some of these older documents and begin to understand the technical challenges. We look at all of these different capabilities and they're commonplace today using our cell phones and on Wi-Fi. Yet then this was cutting edge technology. It was incredible to even be able to use a common transmitter to transmit and communicate with these different types of signals. Some other things I'll point out here is that the types of antennas that they used were the dishes, like this deployable dish that you see on the rover just back behind and to the left of the American flag. And that type of technology was critical in order to communicate back with Earth, because a lot of that communication in that time frame was really point to point. And so the communication was a dedicated dish on the Earth, a very, very large aperture. Even today for lunar missions, we're looking at 7 meter and most of the time as large as like 18 meter and larger type dishes or reflectors. And that there aren't a lot of those in the world. And so to have time using these types of antennas is a pretty precious resource. And then when you're operating at a frequency like Ka-band, which is a very high frequency, the pointing of those beams is a 0.04 degree beam width, which is incredibly tight. So not only is it a very large antenna, which has a lot of gain, that gain comes from your ability to focus that RF energy, and it's focused down to a really fine point, which means that the amount of pointing that you need to be able to do, or the accuracy of that pointing in the presence of wind or the other elements is very, very tight. And that's led to a system of mostly point-to-point communications. There are innovations like the SCAN network and TDRS, the tracking and relay satellites, which provide a space-based relay for that types of communications today. But as we move forward, especially as we start to work with missions that will go to the moon, we need to support many more users than that. If we envision multiple robots, multiple landers, all doing different things on the moon, they can't all have their own dedicated point-to-point link back to Earth. And so this concept of a lunar relay becomes really important. We'll need to be able to service those users with their own beams to prevent interference and to provide dedicated reuse of spectrum. And we'll need to be delay tolerant, because you may be routing data through a network that doesn't have a clean signal from one point to the other throughout the entire communications. And so this type of technology is really a transformation in what is needed in order to begin taking many of the next steps that Artemis and the CLPS program and many other nations are pioneering in order to take that next step on the moon, and also set up forward operating for other deep space missions. This has been recognized by the international community, and an international working group of government space organizations, the IOAG, has defined and actually published in January of this year a lunar communications set of recommendations. They recommended frequencies, they recommended orbits, they recommended architectures for enabling intercommunication. So rather than each country or a particular entity putting up a network that only they could use, defining interoperability, much like cellular or Wi-Fi is interoperable here on Earth. And this network that the US is called LUNANET, ESA's program is Moonlight, Japan and JAXA have a program in the early phases called Stardust, and there's many others that are all now working against this common set of recommendations so that they can produce a more economical solution that allows everyone to work from the baseline architectures and technologies that other groups are deploying. And this is critical for enabling space architecture. This is an example of what NASA is pioneering in terms of a LUNANET architecture to drive this type of interoperability. You can see that there are frequencies recommended here. There are different use cases that are considered, such as relays that are a little bit further out from the moon. You've got CubeSats that might be servicing or measuring or taking data that are closer in. Then you have landers, you have rovers. And if you have a small rover with not much power on it, you're going to want to be able to communicate to a closer satellite so that the link is easier to close. But being able to develop this type of system takes an incredible amount of coordination and also flexibility. When you look at the problems or the opportunities that you're trying to solve, the frequencies is one part of it. But frequency coordination and ground infrastructure, and then choosing these stable orbits that it's a harder orbit problem because you've got the Earth, which has is larger, has a lot more gravity. So a lot of your orbits aren't actually round, and they're not stable. So they require a lot of station keeping in order to continue operating. There are a lot of other aspects that are also need to be considered that really are driven by the communications payload. That includes the need for multi-user support, for security encryption as a first-class citizen, to be able to survive the environment. Lunar environment in orbit is one type of environment where you'll see sun and shade on a fairly regular basis. Depending on where you are on the moon, you may actually be in lunar night, which is half of essentially a month is a full set of moon for all the phases, but essentially half of an Earth month is lunar day, and half of an Earth month is lunar night. And so ultimately, what you end up with is resources that have been placed on the moon that are powered by solar power, but may go for 14, 15 days without actually having access to that ability to charge. And so all of those things have to be considered for survivability as we put assets up, and we need them to be able to continue to operate. And then being able to do these things at a scale that enables economic scalability is really critical. And we're looking at this communications payload problem as a communications company, and looking at the ways that we can leverage the investments that we've made for LEO and GEO and apply those to a lunar setting. And the way we look at the communication systems is really a set of modular scalable building blocks. We have a software-defined radio, we have single board computing, we look at power conditioning and even conversion to hit the different frequencies of interest, and then the types of antennas that you might want to use. And as you look at these different missions that you're going to need to execute in and around the moon, whether it's the relay or actually the user on the ground, different pieces of these building blocks can be utilized in order to build up the system that might be needed. And so the modules that we've been investing in for existing missions include all of the digital backend building blocks you would need with the software, such as waveforms and coding, and then the operational things that you might need. Like, I want to be able to plug an Ethernet in from my rover and immediately be able to communicate with a LUNANET relay. There's a lot of logistics that need to happen there. And those are the types of investments that we're working on, working with our partners, and also have partnered with government partners like NASA Glenn in order to validate these types of technologies. And then continue to invest to grow that software stack so that we can support the TDRS network, so that we can support LEGS, which is the Lunar Exploration Ground Station effort that is currently going on, as well as support commercial ground stations, and then also be compliant to the LUNANET standard, and also be utilized with the different standards that might be adopted by the international community. And building software-defined payloads really allows us to enable that kind of flexibility. And then from an antenna perspective, I'll speak more to phased arrays in a moment, but phased arrays provide a pretty unique opportunity to provide coverage that you can implement beam hopping. You can actually take a narrow beam and widen it so that you can look at a much larger area, sacrificing a little bit of antenna gain. But then you can have a much wider field of view, and then you can create more of a spot beam specifically focused on a particular user if you're trying to detect a weak signal or increase your data rate. And then high gain patches, which are more fixed direction antennas, and then omnipatch, which you might put on a rover, and you want to be able to see the entire hemisphere of the sky so that you can implement communication. And then taking all of these parts and pieces and packaging them up into payloads that are ready to be mounted on a lander or a rover or in a relay satellite is really how we look at trying to tackle this with addressing the challenging environments in the modules themselves, but then building the building blocks that can be assembled in different ways so that we can support different communications needs for the different missions. And so to speak to active phased array, it's a pretty innovative technology. The individual elements on the active phased array are essentially omnidirectional antennas with about a 60-degree-ish type field of view. But when you array them or use multiple of them together, you get the added benefit of you combine the receive power of all of these antennas. And on the transmit side, you also get a gain because you're transmitting all of these antennas. The added functionality is that by varying the phase or the time delay of the signal to each of these antenna elements, I can cause them to constructively add at my intended user, which gives me a nice strong beam at that user, while a low power in the noise type signal for other areas. And what this ultimately gives you is a steerable, pointable, dynamic beam that you can shape and serve multiple users in a very efficient manner. And then you can scale them. So you might start out with one tile, you might use multiple tiles, and they're rugged. They have no moving parts. They can be mounted flush with the surface of the spacecraft. There's no deployables to depend on or that could get broken during transit. And so there's a lot of advantages here. And we really think that these types of technologies that have previously been completely unaffordable and expensive, bringing these to market for space and the rugged environment is really transformative and allowing this innovative technology to be used in a really broad array of missions, whether it's on a lander or on a rover or even on a relay satellite. So with that, we really see this vision coming together where with this robust Earth-based infrastructure being led by all of these different government organizations that are collaborating and have defined this opportunity for interoperability with flexible relay satellites that allow multi-user access and PNT and search and rescue type operations with this infrastructure that, you know, you look at this type of picture and it seems very futuristic. But the first landings of commercial hardware on the moon is coming imminently. In fact, ispace is launching, I'm not sure the exact timeline, it may be tonight, it may be this week, but they're going to be one of the first industrial missions that's going to land on the moon from a commercial perspective and be able to start beginning this exploration of the lunar surface and are really pioneering that effort. And we're really excited to be a part of this growing community that is bringing us to the moon once again and are going to allow us to utilize that for future operations and further in space as we move forward. And so with that concludes my slides. But look forward to Q&A so that we can talk a little bit more about the future.
Yeah, let's jump into Q&A. So we've received a few good questions, but please keep them coming, everyone. So we have a question from Philip. So the CubeSat standard was a major catalyst in making LEO accessible. Will cesium make open standards in this vein to catalyze lunar activity?
That's a great question. One of the things that we've focused on so far is really minimizing the size of the products and payloads that we're putting together so that they can be used in a lot of different missions. So our standard software-defined radio, for example, it's really credit card sized. And having products that are such a small and integrated form factor make them inherently rugged because of the size, but also allow you to start building standardized packaging or interfaces around them that would allow them to be mounted in or on many different bus types. So I think that's a really interesting thought, and we're certainly headed in that direction. Another thing I'll comment on is software. It needs to be compatible as well. And so we've done everything we can to make the standard interfaces like power and Ethernet. Or power and serial, so that the number of interfaces that are required isn't 17 different wires or connections or digital for this and something else for that. And so providing that easy to connect type interface, I think is and then software that's using common standards like CCSDS and common APIs really advances the ability to not just integrate the system mechanically, but also from a electrical and software connectivity as well.
Great. Next, we have a question from Ken. What missions are cesium products part of, and are there any competitors also trying to do lunar comms at the moment?
So we can't comment on all of the missions that are that we're working on participating with at this point, and that's mostly because it's for our mission partners have to announce their mission before we're able to announce their mission. But we have several collaborators among the commercial space community. We've worked very closely with some NASA programs as well, and those programs all have paths to the moon. And so we are making our own investments as well so that we can also be ready and compatible for these types of endeavors going forward.
Next, we have a question from Jesse. What is your prediction on what the funding sources for these infrastructure type communications projects will be? Full commercial, government backed?
That's a great question. So there's a lot of different discussions around that. And something in particular, as I work more and more with the ispace team and understand their view of the world, is they really see this as a long-term engagement in which the ecosystems are really needed. Ecosystems, in fact, are required because there has to be an ROI, a return on investment, in order for commercial space to become more involved. And so it's yet to be seen exactly what those commercial benefits will be. But there's a lot of resources on the moon. Ultimately, the moon was created from the Earth. When the Earth was formed, the moon was also formed. And so the resources on the moon are believed to closely mirror what you see here on Earth. There are different densities of those resources in different areas. But ultimately, maybe that turns into some type of mining activity. Maybe there's a way to generate power. From the communications provider perspective, I see communications just like 3G, 4G, 5G. The wireless companies had to make those investments and put the communications infrastructure in place so that the next innovation, like the iPhone and robotic surgery and things like that, could become common practice. And so for us, our view on it, very simply, is infrastructure comes first. But I tend to believe what ispace's vision is, which is there will be a constant government investment and interest, but also the commercial companies will begin to validate and invest as they start to see economic return on investment from those initial investments.
Question from an anonymous attendee. Are you fundraising?
So we have been through several rounds. I believe all of that information is public. We have a fantastic set of investors that have supported us up to this point, and they have continued to and will continue to support us going forward. But as a private company that is growing fast, there are always opportunities to continue to get involved with companies like ours.
Next, we have a question about what does always on connectivity mean? Is it 24/7 or could it be something less, maybe 20 hours a day in regards for Earth space connectivity?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, always on is always on, and that means 24/7. Certainly for some types of sensor-based missions, delay-tolerant networking is considered acceptable. When you have human-based missions, always on is intended to mean always on, and that you always have the ability to connect. If that type of endeavor is on the far side of the moon, there's obviously a need to relay data back because that side of the moon does not see the Earth. And so building up a lunar relay network infrastructure that will sustain data streaming back to Earth is really, really important. The way the early programs tackled this was that there are ground stations in key locations. In fact, in that initial, I didn't include the graphic, but in the original Apollo slides, it was really incredible to see in this particular paper, which I've linked here, and I can send out links after the call. You can actually look at where all the ground stations were, and they tell you which ground station they used for which part of the mission, from launch all the way through the initial orbit around the Earth, all the way to the moon, and then back when they, all the way through to reentry, when they were talking to ships and no longer ground stations anymore. And so all of that is labeled, you know, it's well understood when they hit radio silence because they were not in direct contact with the Earth or line of sight of the Earth. But going forward, we really see solving that as a key part of NASA's LUNANET. It's also a key part of what NASA is calling Near Space Network, which is anything from GEO essentially all the way out to 2 million kilometers. And we're looking for partners to pursue those types of opportunities as well that might want to fly and utilize our payloads.
Can you please repeat what level of pointing precision is needed to communicate from the moon to Earth?
So it depends on what frequency band you're using, and it depends on your antenna size. So when you're at LEO, for example, like 500 kilometers, then the Earth itself is about plus and minus 60-degree field of view. When you move to GEO, you drop to about 9 degrees field of view. And the further you move out, the tighter and tighter, or the smaller and the smaller your target ends up being. And that doesn't mean you have to transmit with that level of precision, right? Because I can send RF energy much larger than my intended target. But from a antenna efficiency perspective, I want to focus all of that energy on as fine a point as possible so that it improves my link budget. And a link budget in RF terms is essentially, I'm looking at the amount of background noise, I'm looking at how loud I'm yelling, I'm looking at, well, sorry, I'll start at the other end. I'm looking at how loud I'm yelling. The guy that's receiving has a number for the sensitivity of his ear, and the background noise, and RF, its thermal noise, is also measured. And how much of that energy am I going to lose during, in between? All of that is considered. And so you want to really pinpoint as much of that energy on your receive antenna as possible. The point I was making earlier with related to pointing and pointing accuracy is that if you're using an 18-meter dish, which is a very large dish, 18 meters across in diameter, and I'm using Ka band, which is a very high frequency, the pointing accuracy of that antenna configuration, or the beam width, is about 0.04 degrees. And so when I'm pointing at something, I need to point with that level of accuracy, so I'm sure that I hit it in order to track it. Now, moon in relation to Earth is not moving super fast, right? Over the course of a night, it essentially goes from dusk to dawn. But in general, if it's a LEO satellite, I've got to track much faster. And so there's a lot of dynamics to consider when you're building this type of communication system. And it's not quite as simple as just one particular number. I'm not sure if I answered that well, but I'll try.
The next question is, are you planning any phased array tiles for V-band?
Yeah, so as frequency increases, the antenna spacing decreases, but the size of the chips don't change that much. And so as your frequency increases, there's a lot of interesting things that happen. Ka band is our current antenna tile, and it's pretty densely packed with electronics on the backside of that antenna. As you move into V and Q band, you have to start solving some of those problems some different ways. And so, yeah, we're already looking at that type of technology, but the antennas look a little bit differently for a lot of those reasons. That's why at these higher frequencies, you start to see the antennas actually embedded or mounted into the top of the chips themselves. And so the way you design antennas as you go higher and higher in frequency tends to change a little bit.
Cool. Next, we have a question from Philip. Are the lunar relays only connecting lunar actors to Earth, or can it connect lunar actors to other lunar actors?
Great question. So I'm going to jump back to the LUNANET picture because ultimately non-line of sight communication is essentially lunar to lunar type connectivity. And so the general idea is that you will have, rather than bent pipe, like a lot of your, I'll call it a less intelligent relay satellite that will take a signal and just forward it along, maybe at a different frequency and boost power. A lot of what is being planned around LUNANET is for regenerative payloads or for a routing architecture in the actual satellite or in those lunar assets. So it's a long way of saying from the moon to a relay satellite that makes a decision that the end user or the target user is back at the moon. And so it will go through some type of relay jump and then back to the moon. So yeah, absolutely. Moon to moon for non-line of sight. You've got the rover, he's down inside the crater. You've got the lander, they need to communicate. They can't see each other. You know, you shouldn't have to come back to Earth in order to have that, enable that conversation between those two assets.
Great. Next, we have a question from Manuel. Would a phased array antenna covered in regolith dust have degraded performance?
That's an active research topic. Absolutely. Absolutely an active research topic. I don't know the answer to that question yet. Certainly is determined by the makeup of the regolith. You know, we put radomes on antennas all the time, and they're considered RF transparent, you know, minor loss in that radome itself. But certainly if it's metallic in some way, then it's something that you definitely have to be more concerned with. So yes, very, very interesting question. And I look forward to learning more.
It looks like we have ispace present, but I believe you guys may have joined as a viewer. So I just actually resent the panelist invitation to both Hakamada-san and Andrew Ames, both of your emails. So let me know. I'll keep asking questions until we see you pop in.
Excellent.
What next question is, how would cesium products support cellular type infrastructure on the surface of the moon?
Great question. So we're really excited about all of the different wireless investments that are being made. Some recent announcements were made that there is some use of Wi-Fi for point-to-point communication, which is a great innovation. And then also cellular, so using 3GPP type signals for point-to-point communication on the moon. A lot of our focus at this point has been on communication to relay satellites and onboard relay satellites, but we definitely see a need for that closer in communication for coordination on the moon. And I'd like to welcome Hakamada-san. Thank you very much for joining. I just gave a quick presentation of our slides, but would like to transition to you to welcome you. And if you'd like to say a few words on ispace and your mission, that would be wonderful.
Well, thank you very much having me, and then my apology joining late because of somebody trouble to connect to the internet. So shall I present my presentation for my introduction?
Yes, please.
Okay, so as many of you know, we are about to launch our first lunar missions. Supposed to be last week, however, Falcon 9 rocket is scrapped, and then they are checking additional investigation of their booster. So it takes time to finish everything. So we are currently waiting SpaceX update to confirm the next launch date. So stay tuned on our launch. And then this is our lunar lander. We are going to launch sometime soon. Well, this is our first private lunar landers going to land on the moon. And then the difference is this is developed by only the private funding. Some of the private lunar companies developing their lunar landers. However, they have support by the NASA so on, but this is purely the commercial development. Just a quickly overview about ispace. Well, we are located in Tokyo headquarters, but we have global presence in United States in Denver, and then also Luxembourg in Europe. And then we have over 200 employees globally. And then Japanese are surprisingly only the less than half. So it's really a global organization. And then, so this is a quick picture of each of the offices. And then our vision is to expand our planet, expand the future, which we want to extend our human presence into outer space. And especially, we aim to establish cis-lunar ecosystem, economically viable architecture ecosystem to support the sustainable activity in space, and then ultimately support the sustainability of the Earth. In order to do that, we believe that we need to unlock the space resource utilization. And then once we obtain the water resources on the lunar surface, we can deploy the gas station in space, and then it's gonna transform the space transportation dramatically, economically reasonable way. And then if we can do that, around 2040, we envision that we have more than 1,000 people living and working on the lunar surface to create economy. And then also 10,000 people traveling between the Earth and the Moon. And then in order to do that, we start from the transportation system. And then we are developing micro landers, and then also a little bit larger scale landers in the United States to support NASA's mission after mission 3. Series 1 lander can support 30 kilograms payload to the lunar surface, and then Series 2 lander can support up to 500 kilograms of the payload to the lunar surface. Then our strategy plan is to increase the number of the frequency of the mission, not expanding, increasing our payload capacity per lander. So we are expecting to provide the transportation service after 2025, 2 or 3 missions per year basis. We believe that there's a variety of the customers from NASA, will be outside NASA's other national space industries, national space agencies, and also the commercial private sectors too. And then also not only just the landing on the moon, we're going to provide mobility service on the lunar surface, especially to acquire the data at the beginning. And then also we expect to have our own satellite around the moon, and then acquire the global data. And then we can incorporate the data platform to support the activity on the lunar surface, and then for the development of the payload or the architecture in cis-lunar in the future. Especially our first mission, we have variety of the customers already on board for our first missions. MBRC's Rashid lunar rovers from the UAE's space agency, and then also the JAXA's small payload, and then even the commercial sectors, private sectors. NGK, it's a Japanese company to deliver the solid state battery test module. And also we have a contract with NASA to do the world first commercial transaction with lunar resources on the lunar soil. lunar surface. This is a very important mission to pave the way for the utilization of the space resources in the future. And then let me skip that. And then this is our size of the spacecraft. This is very micro size of the lunar lander. And then in order to land on the moon, we take the low energy orbit, which means we take about 5 months to land on the moon after the launch. So if we can launch this month, our landing time will be around the end of April. So stay tuned as well for the lunar landing in the next spring. Then, this is the short movie of our lander development. This lander is assembled in the Germany with help from the Ariane group. We are procuring propulsion components from Ariane group, and also have a support to have the space to assemble our final integration of the spacecraft. Then this is the not as the size of the small sat, microsat, so on. So this is very complex system. Even the startup, it shows we could develop this size of the complex spacecraft. And then in the future missions, we about to launch first mission, and then we plan to launch the second mission in 2024, and we already have confirmed customers for our payload. And then also we are working on the third missions, and then still available payload space. Payload space is available, so if you are interested, please contact us. This, especially mission 3, is particularly have the NASA's program, Commercial Lunar Payload Service. And then we won this contract through the Draper laboratory, working together with Draper laboratory. They are providing decent guidance navigation control software for us from the past mission, and including these third missions as well. And then we are going to land on the south pole of the lunar surface, and then also the far side of the lunar surface. So that means we require communication radio satellite. So we plan to launch 2 of the small satellites together with this lander, and then establish communication radio capability from the far side of the moon to the Earth ground station. So this satellite is initial phase for us, and then we expect to support variety of the mission in the future for the lunar missions. And then lastly, our uniqueness is we have been doing the business globally, and we have organization globally as well. Our headquarters is based in Tokyo. However, also we are working with NASA for the NASA CLPS, and also we have Luxembourg office, and working closely with ESA together with Ariane here. So this we can leverage and then become the bridge between the US, Europe, and then Japan, and this is very important, and then important conference partners globally to do business in Switzerland in the future. Yeah, that is the brief introduction of our activities as ispace.
Thank you for that great presentation. We can jump back into a few questions as we still have a bit of time remaining. So feel free to send more questions in after now we have that second presentation down. More questions might have come up or they've changed, but we have one ready to go for ispace. Can you elaborate on why Moon to Mars is of less cost than Earth to Mars direct for missions?
Well, in order to lower the cost for the Mars to the Moon, we need to leverage the space resource utilization. Then having the fuel capability on the Moon or around the Moon that lower the cost significantly to go to the Mars in the future. And then I believe at the same time, this propellant, the fuel capability architecture will support the activity in cislunar, the space activity for the Earth as well. And then we can expect more economically reasonable activities to support sustainability of the Earth in the future.
And we have another question coming about, could you both parties elaborate more on the partnership together?
Well, so because our vision, mission is to have international partnership in each of the regions, Japan, United States, and then Europe. We are closely working with each of the nations. And then also, it can be the bridge between the government and the industries. Our mission, we believe that without more commercial players in the cislunar activities, we cannot create sustainable economical activities in cislunar. So we encourage the companies who don't have space business yet, but interested in entering space business in the future to support the initial activities. I just skipped one slide previously, but this is one of the program we are having, HAKUTO-R partnership program. This is entry for the non-space companies to have activity in space. For example, Japan Airlines, they have welding technologies to maintain the aircraft engine. And we utilize such a technology to welding our propellant pipe in the spacecraft. And another example is Mitsui Sumitomo Insurance Company. They are not related to technology. However, together with ispace, they developed lunar insurance. And then we become the first customer for the lunar insurance. This insurance cover even the landing on the lunar surface. So that is quite interesting collaboration working together.
Eric, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, stay tuned for future missions and announcements as they come.
Great. The next question is towards ispace. Could you share a projected price per kilogram to the surface for missions when you enter regular service, looking at slide 8?
Well, unfortunately, currently we don't disclose the pricing right now. And then, however, you can have the revenue of the service, the pricing, looking at the other companies' pricing. And then, but one thing I can tell is currently the transportation service pricing is much less than the traditional government missions. Let's say 1/5 to 1/10 of the pricing of the transportation. So that enable many players to start entering cislunar activities. And then one another aspect is we can provide rideshare missions to the small payload players as well. So it's opened up more opportunity for the variety of the ideas for the payload in the future.
Can you discuss any future lunar material return plans? Question from Cameron.
Well, currently our vision is one way to deliver the payload from the Earth to the Moon. We don't plan to return back the lunar resources or the anything out of the Moon at this moment. But if in the future the cislunar ecosystem become more sustainable and then expect more larger market for the return mission, that would be a very interesting market in the future.
And I'm seeing we have one more question. So any questions? It's now or never. And then I'll give an opportunity to add anything from the panelists that they might have wanted to add. But the last question is, I see towards Hakamada-san, and it's, will you be visiting the moon in your future?
Well, very good question. Well, I hope in the long run, I'm gonna visit to the moon, because as I said in the beginning, we envision around 2040, 1,000 people living on the lunar surface, and then for sure we have office on the moon. So I have a reason to travel to the moon in the future.
We have one more question come in. I'm not sure if you guys can speak to this, but if not, just let us know. So wondering what kind of antennas you are using in your missions and curious about what the partnership with Cesium looks like.
Well, in our first mission, we are using X-band and S-band to support to enable the communication between our lunar lander and the ground station. And then in the future, what I can tell is stay tuned. We believe that we recognize Cesium's communication technology is very advanced and then very capable. So I think Cesium's communication radio technology is very attractive for our future missions as well.
Yeah, and my recommendation is keep reading those payload emails when they come in, and you'll get to learn more about all sorts of things as you know, in the coming weeks, months, and over time.
Yeah. So yeah, with that, is there anything else either of you would like to share that we haven't touched upon, or all good?
Yeah, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to present today. Thank you for Payload for keeping us all informed of the latest events happening in the community. It's always exciting to wake up and catch the email and the news. There's so much going on. It's a really exciting time to be working in this industry. And it's amazing to have visionaries like Hakamada-san who are helping us go to places that we've not been before in a very long time. So Jess, thank you for hosting this event as well.
Well, thank you very much for having me today. And then again, my apology joining late today. But I really appreciate having me today. And cislunar become the next market to go. And then I have no doubt on that. And then working with the many of the partners and then players, this is very important to create sustainable ecosystem. If the ispace only play in the cislunar, it's not sustainable. So I really welcome many players, including our competitors, direct competitors, to working together to expand this market and our futures.
Great, yeah. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Hakamada-san, and thank you all to the viewers for joining. And also thank you for Cesium for sponsoring and making this whole thing possible. Definitely an interesting time to be having this conversation and very exciting stuff to come. So thank you. Yeah, also from us at Payload, if you're not subscribed to us, payloodspace.com is where you can get subscribed to us, register for other webinars and things like that. And if any of you are in the Austin area, we are having our happy hour tonight. So please come register. Let me know if you need a link or anything like that. But yeah, thank you everyone so much. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your days.